Well, good morning. We've reached that time of year when we kick off the show and it's dark outside. And of course, the days will continue to get shorter for another couple of months. Imagine how it would be if the lights didn't come on in the dark when we flipped that switch. For that matter, if it weren't for electricity, I wouldn't be on the air, and it wouldn't make any difference because your TV set wouldn't work either. A lot of issues around electric power these days, and we're going to be talking about some of them with the chairman of the Michigan Public Service Commission, coming up right now.
From TV6, this is the Ryan Report. Now, here's your host, Don Ryan.
Well, let me share a thought with you to start off today. See if you agree. We depend on a lot of things to make our lives work, but of all those things, energy is the one that we most often take for granted. The average consumer very seldom even gives it a thought. Heating, cooling, lighting, and operating all those devices we use every day, we flick the switch or set the thermostat and forget it. And energy is not just essential in the home, since many industries providing millions of jobs are heavily dependent on energy. Here in Upper Michigan alone, there are industries providing thousands of jobs in this region who could not operate without energy. But electric power is very much at a crossroads today. It's likely that many coal-fired electric generating plants in Michigan and around the country will be forced to close because of EPA regulations. There are a number of government agencies, as well as those in the industry, who are working to develop plans for the future. Recently, I had the opportunity to participate in the UP Energy Summit, where I had a chance to sit down with the chairman of the Michigan Public Service Commission to get some insights into the issues of energy. Many residential and commercial electric ratepayers in Upper Michigan dodged a bullet earlier this year with the agreement to avoid the use of what's called an SSR to offset costs associated with the operation of the Presque Isle Power Plant. That SSR would have increased electric power rates for many Upper Michigan residents. The new agreement involved electric utilities, transmission systems, federal agencies, Cliffs Natural Resources, the Office of Governor Snyder, area legislators, and the MPSC staff. The long-term solution involves the permitting and construction of a gas-powered generating plant which would be adequate to meet Cliffs' needs and potentially providing electric power to other consumers as well to replace the Presque Isle plant. I began the conversation with MPSC Chairman Quackenbush by asking if that agreement continued to be on track.
Yes, it very much is. We're happy to have reached a solution that could cut off the SSR payment to only a one-year time period, so there's no new charges being accumulated. We're still continuing to have discussions about recovery of those costs, both the dollar amount and the cost allocations, who pays what portion of it for that 1 year, but I'm happy that it's been restricted to just a one-year time period.
And this would envision the construction of a gas-powered power plant. Is that project, let's say, on schedule? Is it moving forward? I know building any new plant today requires a lot of effort, a lot of permitting. Does it appear to be on track?
Yes, it's very much on track. Like you mentioned, there is a very long-term cycle for planning and for construction, and there are agreements in place to go ahead and build a gas-fired power plant, and those are moving very much ahead and should culminate in a final agreement here early 2016.
This whole issue brought on a lot of discussion because many decisions were made, for example, by the Wisconsin Public Service Commission that involved this issue. The possibility of Michigan maybe gaining more control over its own future, is that something we can anticipate?
Yes, I think we're very focused on having Michigan people, Michigan representatives, make decisions for what's in the best interest of Michigan, and I think that's why we're focused on a low-cost generation solution as a long-term answer to the Upper Peninsula power needs.
People are receiving mailings or watching television commercials about the future and power plants to close, including Presque Isle Power Plant. Is this likely? Is this going to happen? Is this definite as far as the outlook for the future of power generation in Michigan?
Well, certainly the 9 coal units that you hear about in the commercials are planned for 2016, and those will happen. It's almost too late to not have it happen if that was what was desired. But these are aged coal plants. They don't meet environmental restrictions, and there are a series of agreements where those plants will be going away. Now, the Presque Isle plant you mentioned is actually not in that 2016 wave. It's contemplated more in 2020, and I think these final agreements that we've discussed potentially coming after the first of the year, those will very clearly show the future role of the Presque Isle plant.
With the EPA rulings, and this isn't your wording, but you kind of indicated this may be just the beginning. That there probably are more power plant closings to come beyond those 9.
Yes, there are, particularly in the Lower Peninsula. There's another wave of coal that could be retired sometime in the 2020s, and it could come, 2021, 2022 time period at the earliest, or they could be more like 2025, 2026. And so there's a lot of analysis being done to optimize the time frame. We like to minimize bills that customers have to pay, and so that's a big focus. We're trying to balance affordability with the reliability, as well as being able to maintain good working plants as long as we can, but also meeting environmental requirements.
I'll be back with more questions for Chairman Quackenbush after we pause for this break. This morning we're featuring a conversation with John Quackenbush that was recorded during the UP Energy Summit. In the next segment, we discuss some of the planning that's currently underway and the intent of the state legislature to develop its plans to meet Michigan's future energy needs. One of the key sticking points in the legislative discussion involves choice, which is the opportunity for energy users to select their own power supplier. We asked the MPSC chairman if he agreed with Governor Snyder's goal to have Michigan have its own plan to meet EPA requirements and Michigan's future energy needs.
Yes, we very much will do that. We have a deadline coming up in September of 2016 where we have to file a state plan, and we are underway. We're collaborating across numerous government agencies at the state, including the Public Service Commission, the Michigan Agency for Energy, the Department of Environmental Quality, the MEDC, Economic Development folks. We're all working together. We all have a different piece of the package, and when we put it together, I think we can end up in a place where there's a great plan for Michigan.
You mentioned the Michigan Agency for Energy, which is a new department created by the governor. How do you envision the role of that department, and what's the Public Service Commission's relationship? How do you work together with them?
Well, the Agency for Energy is very much an encourager of collaboration. Like I mentioned, the 4 agencies that we're all working together in the Clean Power Plan. That's a key aspect of what their work is. There's other things they've done with energy efficiency. For instance, there were numerous state agencies that all had responsibility for a piece of the energy efficiency puzzle. And it was like, okay, why not get them, and they all need to have those separate responsibilities, but we need to have a coordinator that can kind of help that flow and make sure that people are all in sync. And so I think that will benefit our energy efficiency programs here in Michigan as well.
The other thing that's happening is the Michigan legislature is looking at energy issues. The Senate and the House both came up with separate plans. I think they're trying to work together. How do they play into this whole process? Obviously, they're the legislative policymakers.
Yes, the Michigan legislature last did a major piece of energy legislation in 2008, and we've been very much at the commission part of implementing that plan, and I think it's worked well generally. But it's time, for a number of reasons, including having met some goals for 2015 and also these looming 2016 retirements, it's time to set new goals and a new path. And so we're very much being a resource to the legislature as they make their considerations. And at the end of the day, we'll have work to do that the legislature directs us to do. And so part of that is potentially, some resource planning. And so we're stand willing and waiting to fulfill that need if that's what the legislature determines.
There are some pieces of that legislation. One is the Michigan Choice Program, which is very limited. Are we likely to see that stay or go away, or is that something that we have to kind of wait to see how the legislature plays out?
Well, I think it's not final yet, but I know that we've heard from Senator Knopf, who's driving the effort in the Senate, and Representative Nesbitt, who's driving the effort in the House, as well as the governor has spoken, and they've all talked about that they seems like they're focusing on keeping choice while keeping the choice cap on and requiring some kind of capacity showing by the different alternative electric suppliers so that they can show they're committed to Michigan. If they're going to do business here and they're going to sign up customers, that they have the capacity that backs up the power that they're selling.
Another issue, I think, is net metering, where people generating their own power can feed it back into the system. There's a feeling that perhaps they need to make some changes so that those taking advantage of that service are helping to pay for some of the costs of the grid. Does that make sense from your perspective?
Well, I think that's a very key part of the package that is one of the pieces that Senator Knopf and Representative Nesbitt are working to hammer out an agreement. And again, we are implementers at the Commission of what was set up on net metering in 2008, and if that changes, we will. They look to us to be the implementers of that again. The opening line in the Michigan Public Service Commission mission statement says it is to grow Michigan's economy and enhance the quality of life of its communities. I was kind of surprised to read that because, we kind of think of the Public Service Commission as this regulatory body, but to say a major part of our mission is economic development. How do you go about that from the framework of the policy making opportunities that you have? We're focused on economic development in a couple of ways. One is that we understand that our utilities are some of the biggest investors in the state of Michigan, and we have infrastructure projects that are in concept that can be done and really benefit the citizens of Michigan. And so we're focused on that. We're encouraging infrastructure projects and the right infrastructure projects to get built, whether it's for distribution, electricity, for transmission, for generation and gas, and as well as telecommunications, broadband, we have a focus on. So when we talk about enhancing the quality of life in communities, one of the things we do on the broadband side is encourage rural areas, different parts of the state, to get certified and attain certain broadband levels so that it enhances the quality of life for the entire community, whether it's hospitals, libraries, small businesses, citizens, K through 12 education, and higher education.
I'll be back to wrap up this morning's interview after we take a break for these important messages. Continuing our interview with John Quackenbush, we asked the MPSC chairman if the organization he represents, which has statewide responsibilities, could really focus on regional concerns, like here in Upper Michigan.
Yes, we can, and we do that quite often. I mean, there are statewide issues that we deal with, but a couple years ago we had a range of issues that were focused on Detroit. We handled those, we delved into it. We've done some things, for instance, in southwestern Michigan, Kalamazoo area. We've done some things in the thumb area. It's inevitable that there'll be the different places that have different needs at different times. Right now, we are devoting a lot of resources to the Upper Peninsula. We have for the last 2 years. We have 22 active FERC cases at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in Washington, D.C. that we're actively involved in just on the Upper Peninsula.
It appears in the case of natural gas that supply is not an issue in this country at this time, and probably not for the foreseeable future, but delivering the gas through pipelines could be an issue. How is Michigan prepared to be able to meet future needs in that area?
I think Michigan's positioned well because, number one, we're a producing state. We produce gas and meet about 17 or 18% of our own needs, so that's a good foundation. Then we are the number one state for gas storage. We have wonderful geologic formations where we can store natural gas, and that means it's always right there, so we're not reliant on just-in-time pipeline delivery. We can accept gas through pipelines from all parts of the nation and all parts of the continent, actually, and store gas so that we have a good supply there when we need it. And we also have new pipelines proposed to be built, as well as expansion of pipelines. We have 2 pipeline proposals right now for new pipelines coming from the Utica Shale in eastern Ohio area and Marcellus Shale, which is Pennsylvania, West Virginia area. Now, we can get that gas to Michigan now through existing pipes, but we'll have more of an expressway to get it here if these 2 pipelines get built. And they're at varying stages of being in the approval process, but they're contemplating as being 2017, 2018 kind of time frames. On top of that, the 2 pipelines that serve the Upper Peninsula in particular, the Trans-Canada line as well as the Northwest Natural line, are doing some work. I know there's capacity available in the Trans-Canada line to bring more gas through this area, as well as Northwest Natural has been enhancing and upgrading and expanding to get gas specifically to the Marquette market.
Certainly this has to be a really challenging time when we talk about developing plans, whether it's for electric energy and we're building new power plants, gas-powered plants. It affects, you know, the availability and supply of gas. And there are so many variables in that picture, particularly as you look at demand and things that can happen. How do we go about that process, and how do we make sure we develop a plan that's going to work going forward?
Well, I think you hit on the key is that we need to stay flexible. We'll put the best plan in place that we can, you know, particularly as the legislative process is completed and it's revealed kind of exactly how we're going to go about resource planning. I think the vision is that we'll do long-term planning but stay adaptable in the short term, because we know some things we can do today in the next several years to get to the ultimate goal, and we'll get those done, and then we'll be on to the next project, but we'll also be revisiting the long-term goal again. So we'll be able to, you know, do some things today that we'll have no regrets about, that will be beneficial, and then still do more. And we know technology changes, we know costs change. We want to stay on top of all of that as we continually adjust our plans.
The focus of this conference has been energy, but you mentioned your agency is also involved in things like broadband. What are some of the challenges on that horizon?
Well, one of the broadband is a competitive in a circumstance there, and so we like to encourage fostering competition. So the more providers, the better. And some of the challenges come in rural areas, particularly agricultural solutions. We've been learning a lot and focused on that at the Commission because we know, like some of the bigger cities, it's more economical for a competitive provider to be able to invest in the infrastructure and earn a great return on it. In some other areas, it's more challenging for that to happen. So we foster the ability and get local community involvement actually is the key, because when we can get local leaderships, we can help foster the atmosphere, but they're the leaders that will make it happen.
appreciate your talking to us today. Anything that you didn't get a chance to talk about that you might want to add to this conversation?
Well, I think we're just going to continue the fight here in Michigan. We're going to try and do the right things, end up in a good place. We want reliability, we want affordability, and we want environmental protection, all in the atmosphere of being adaptable so that we can be flexible and adjust.
There are still a lot of answers to be determined concerning the future of electric power in Upper Michigan. We'll continue to watch to see how they develop. I'll be back after we take this break. How many of you remember when we used to call the telephone company to get the time? I can still recall those familiar words. At the tone, the time will be 7:55 and 10 seconds. Beep. I mentioned this to a young person one day and they said, "Why would you call the phone company to ask for the time? It's right there on your phone." And she was right. Every time I turn my cell phone on, the time appears on the screen. But as many of you know, it wasn't always that way. I kind of hate to admit it, but I can remember the days when you could just pick up the phone and ask the operator for the time. That was also back in the days when we had a two-party line, which meant you shared the line with another Michigan Bell customer. So when did it all go away? Based on some internet research, it appears that in most places, the final end came in 2007. I didn't find any specific reference to when it happened in Michigan. Who was the voice we heard on the phone? In the 1950s, a woman named Mary Moore emerged as the nation's leading time teller. Her distinctive tone and odd pronunciation of the numbers 5 and 9 influenced a generation of operators. By far the most prominent time lady was Jane Barbie, who went on to become the voice of recorded telephone messages in the 1970s and 80s in the United States and elsewhere. Along with the time, Barbie delivered the bad news too, telling you that circuits in a specific area were busy, please try again later, or your call cannot be completed as dialed. And who can forget her heart-rending rendition of, "I'm sorry, the number you have dialed is no longer in service." And that's especially true if you're looking for the time. It's estimated that at the height of her fame, Barbie's voice was heard worldwide about 40 million times a day. But as they say, time marches on. Just don't call the phone company to ask what time it is. I'll be back in 2 minutes. Well, that's all the time we have for this morning. I appreciate having the chance to sit down with the chairman of the Michigan Public Service Commission to talk about important energy issues. The Today Show is coming up next. I hope you have a great day and join us next Sunday morning.